So, on my economy of scale, I don't really understand exactly what the motivation was this evening, but I got a notice yesterday evening about the online tax preparation service I used last year. And when I used it, I ended up filing a protest with the Internal Revenue Services concerning my taxes. I protested the amount of tax that I'd been assessed in consideration of the income I reported. And they sent me a variety of things, including a form that I still have. That was, what's the date on this? Oh, this is for later time. Actually, this is after. But I have the documents I was just looking at it regarding my filing of my tax return and my protest, and I ended up having a phone conversation with somebody from the IRS and went through the last several years of my income that had been reported to the IRS, which is different than the income that was available in the printout from the Social Security office that I received in 2018. And among them, that's how, for instance, I found out that I had been defrauded out of my retirement benefits from when I worked at the Department of Public Health in San Francisco, and that there were other things concerning my income that had been reported to the IRS that were inaccurate. So I filed an appeal after I filed my taxes. And then in the course of that, I received direct deposit with the information I gave them in consideration of my taxes. What was identified in my account as a federal tax return. And it's what it says on the statement. It's what it says on the actual accounting statement. And it was for $1,200. And it was around the time that the stimulus was approved. But in my account, it says federal tax return. Well, the stimulus that just, or whatever just came in December, does not say federal tax return. It says something else. It says government direct deposit, whereas the other one said federal tax return direct deposit. And so it's like this thing where it's like, well, how much you want to split hairs? Like, how sassy do you want to get? I did actually legitimately protest my tax return. I did literally protest my income and acts of identity theft and other situations and talked with somebody from the IRS. I got all the information I needed for that. Now the end of the year is coming. I did my taxes, and I also did my taxes, understanding that I have an LLC, and they let you know, right? The ironic thing is they said, well, you don't have to pay taxes on your stimulus. Don't worry about it. You don't have to pay taxes. Well, what if all you got this year was the stimulus money? What if all you got this year was the first one and the second one? Did anybody else get the money from the stimulus from the beginning of the year, and did it deposit to their account saying federal tax return? Or did it have some other categorization? Was it categorized at the beginning of the year differently than it was categorized at the end of the year? Right? Because if you're like me and you're dealing with an LLC, well, it actually says on the record that it was a tax return, and I have all the information that I requested a review of my taxes. And with that tax return, what did I do? Well, things that, I incorporated, I got stuff for my business. So my tax return for this year reflects income as part of the tax return from last year that was a business investment. And then there was the $600 from the stimulus. So right after you finish your taxes, what's the last thing it says? Well, let's make sure you got all your stimulus money. Do you qualify? What do you qualify for? You might qualify. Well, then you go through and you're like, well, what did you get? What did you get? Well, the first time, technically, it was a tax return. It didn't say stimulus, and it didn't say government direct deposit like it did the second time. So, what does this say to me? Was this how double leverage worked during the 2008 banking bailout? Was somebody allowed to credit or leverage as one particular kind of itemization, or shall we say categorization, the first money that came from TARP, and then when TALF came around and they paid back the TARP money with the TALF money, were they really using that first installment under a different kind of classification so that then it could be sat on and it was the initial payout. So it was the faith and credit that the government had at the time before it ended up having to commingle all of those toxic assets it had to take on, while it also became shareholders in those companies and worked to have all of these other assets from people in the United States centralized into the government to help them launder their toxic assets. So by the time the TALF came around, well, TALF was with all that stuff that had happened after they laundered all the other stuff, including everything that they had taken from the people and expropriated from the people because they didn't do what Congress set out for them to do with TARP, which was work with individuals to repair their credit. And then to determine from that what means were available for renegotiating and refinancing the bonds that were part of the toxic debt that had been taken on in the highly speculative financial regime that had been engaged by these financial services firms. They didn't do that. That's what they were supposed to do. That's not what they did. They ended up giving this bailout to all these big companies, including GM. And the story is GM didn't pay back TARP immediately. They sat on it. And did they accrue interest? Well, they put it in what? Savings program? And then used the TALF money, money to pay back whatever they had on the ledger as being the amount associated with TARP. But it wasn't the same money. It wasn't the same assets. It wasn't the same currency. It was different. What did they actually use it for? How did they actually characterize it? How did they actually categorize it? And so now we're at the end of the year and, you have the option. Well, you can get it back direct deposit or you could buy a savings bond. Would you like to use some of your tax return from this year to buy a savings bond? So on one level or another, what if I say I want to buy a savings bond? What if I want to buy a government bond? Is this my war bond? And if I buy this war bond with this tax return, does it identify a process of honoring the potential rollover or redemption for previous war bonds that the United States had issued? But the question is, well, what is going to be financing it? Are they going to go through and split hairs? Or let me ask you this, how many people would even do that or even know to do that? If all you got was the stimulus money this year, you have no reason to try to file taxes. And if you're trying to go through some sort of small business assistance and you have to go through the PPP and you have to go through all those other things, well, you wouldn't have been available and you wouldn't have been eligible to be availed of the kind of individual relief that someone like me got. And that would be all the income I would have recorded for the year. No, pretty much, right? All of the income. Now, how many companies have me on their payroll that have been working PPP with my identity that I don't get credit for? What are they going to do? Are they going to invest in government bonds with their tax return? Am I working some double leverage scheme right now? If I buy that, if I put the money into a savings bond, is it a legit bond? Is it bond fraud? Is it bond fraud because they're not acknowledging that we're at war right now and instead it's going to be mischaracterized as a catastrophic bond? Is it a savings bond based upon a tax return that is owed to me as part of tax, various kinds of tax incentives available to somebody that is a small business owner during this time frame? Or am I engaged in some sort of competitive brinksmanship? I called their bluff. They didn't characterize it at the onset in the correct manner. If I have to do the books, if I have to do the accounting, I can't say it's stimulus. It was my tax return. So what do I do with my tax return? I mean, I guess we're going to have to see what happens once I get my special form for itemized deductions of business expenses, because I can't technically formally file it until the form is ready. The form isn't ready yet, right? And then we're going to have to figure out about these companies that have my name on their payroll that are getting credit for all kinds of things and all kinds of programs that have been set up for COVID-19. And I know because I'm constantly chasing down their dirty deals, right? They didn't even give me a W-2. We're almost at the end of January, right? If it makes you feel any better, I would pay all the taxes I owed and avail myself of all the benefits I could as a small business owner.